So this is the biggest thing,
Uh-oh.
gains and losses, right? Because that's what you're doing in investing.
Yeah.
And these are they're very rarely correct when I review them. Okay, so that was a big one. So this is kind of a smaller one as well. And again, this would, you take your notes, you take possession of the property, and then people do rent them out, right? I do see that happen a lot. And so you work with a property management company and you get the deposit from the property management company, right? They've taken the rent, they've paid the expenses, the repairs, and you get that deposit. Most people just record that deposit as income. Well, you have to break out every line of that property management statement. I mean, I have some people who have multifamily, so we're talking lots and lots of units, and the line, you can have 20, 30, 40. You can have a lot of lines when you're breaking out that property management company, because it's your checks and balances for one thing. And I will tell you that this is the worst part of my job, because
Wow.
these property managers aren't usually bookkeeping people, right? And they have their system. So everything in their system is just money in or out.
Yep.
And so it's just not always accurate, and they don't really have a checks and balances system.
Correct.
So I find errors probably every month on every property management statement. It's just kind of one of those things. Or I get a new property management statement and the opening balance doesn't match the ending balance of the month before. So we know something's changed and we're trying to figure it out. But most of the time, like this example, when I was helping this gentleman with his, he had 12 months and the property management reports showed rent received, but it did not translate into his deposits. So they owed him $700.
Wow.
So they had collected it, and it wasn't intentional, right? It's just, again, if they're making changes or things in their system, or they just didn't quite put it in the right place, then it didn't come across. So we always just think that when we get these statements and we get these deposits, that they're correct. And it's just not always the case. But I would say 2 + 2 does not equal 5. And so on a spreadsheet it can, but putting it in a system, it can't, right?
You're always about making things faster, but also smarter, and double checking, make sure nothing is being missed. That's the biggest thing we miss. And we kind of get lazy at times. I mean, we just throw it in there because we're looking at this one thing. I think that's where most people get, have a mistake where they forgot to log something, or they didn't do something, it didn't count for something, or they don't know what category to put something in. They have a transaction, and people get lost in that. And CPAs, like Marty, is not their bread and butter, right? They're not built to do that. They can do it, but that's not what they're for. It's the day-to-day transactions is where bookkeeping comes into huge play here.
Yeah. And I'm certainly not a CPA. I love the money side. I like the bookkeeping. I like this side of it. But you'll see here shortly. I mean, I do try to line your books up for your CPA to match the fields that they need to insert into their systems, right? So, I do try to be very aware of those type of things. But now let me translate this even more into your note servicing companies. So it's very similar to the property management. Because these, every month, this property manager report showed that he was getting $700 a month. It's on the reports, but it didn't translate into his deposit. Right?
Oh, man.
So you're seeing your property management report, you're saying, oh, rent every month.
Yeah.
But he wasn't actually getting the money.
Because he's not tracking his bank account.
Yeah. That's like when the season changes and you've got your old winter jacket back out and you stick your hand in the pocket and there's $20. Yes. In this case.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing for your servicers, because at the end of the year, we're breaking out those servicing reports. There's principal, interest, servicing fees. Sometimes there's force-placed insurance. And if you've got 100 notes, you might have 100 lines on your breakout. But it really has to be done, because that's your only checks and balances. And I'll have this happen all the time. Every month.
Without naming names, are there servicers that are better or worse at what they do?
Yes, there are some that we don't find many errors on, and there's some that, are just a struggle. Yeah,
Yes.
for
Yes.
sure.
So
And
if you
that's the
are
only
listing
reason,
servicers, watch
yeah,
yourself.
I couldn't really put a servicer up here because all of the ones I had people's names. So that's kind of why
Yes. Appreciate that. Yes.
property management. But we'll find at the end of the year, the servicers have, most of them have what we call a 1099 report. And so it'll show for the borrower all the principal received, all the interest received, and then that supposedly comes to you, right? And so at the end of the year, that's our checks and balances. Okay, does our principal match? Does our interest match? And at the end of the year, a lot of times it won't, because how many times are you working with the servicer and during the year something was wrong and they fixed it, right? Or they might have done something as principal when it should have been interest, and so they fix it, and now our totals don't match, and so we have to go back but that 1099 report spells it out for us again, so we can, make sure that it's there. But there's many times there's 12 principal payments, 12 interest payments, and the client only got 11. So we find money all the time.
And one of the things we recently ran into is that we would put up, pay for property taxes, right? And we completely forget if we ever got the money back, because we keep moving. And this facet tells us, hey, listen, you're still pending this, and ours is stuck in BK in one of our assets, and we're waiting a year for that money to come back. But it's really easy to forget about that, right? Like, oh, I put the money up, this case, I think the property tax was like $600. Almost forgot about it until our system flagged and says, hey, listen, this is still outstanding. And we have a reminder set for every 3 months. We got to follow up on this. But if you're doing this on spreadsheet, you can easily completely forget that you pay property taxes and you're still waiting for the money to return.
Yeah. And here's the other thing that people do on that is they will take that $600 that they paid for property tax and they'll count it as a property tax expense. And it shouldn't be coded like that. It's almost more like escrow. So it should actually be sitting in like the balance sheet on holding costs. And then you'll never forget about it because you paid that 600 and now each time you get that money back from the borrower, it's reducing that 600.
Gotcha.
So then you can't lose it, right? If it's in your books like that. But if you just took it as an expense, exactly, now it's gone on the
yeah, very well said.
Yeah.
I mean, Nathan, how many times you pay property tax, right? Like all the time, especially in notes in BK, because what we found in since the pandemic is BK loans just are not the same as before. There's so much delay now in BK, I found, that just seems to be prolonging, and just expenses add up. You're paying property taxes, you're paying this, paying that, and the BK court's very slow to respond. And if you don't have these flags and checks and balances or a bookkeeper to kind of remind you, you're going to have a lot of problems because you're going to think you're making more money and realize that you put out all this money out there that's still sitting there in like accounts receivable kind of feel.
Yeah.
And I've had the opposite as well, where borrowers making overpayments into their escrow account for taxes. And then at the end of the year, we say, oh, look, you've got an extra $2,000 in there. Do you want to just apply that to your payment? I can't do that, but they can. But they have
that's true.
Wants to tell the servicer, go ahead and apply that to payment, and they get a break, or they can catch up on payments, or whatever the case might be.
Yes, yeah. And so, like I said, in general, you get these statements from people and you just think that they're correct, right? And so you have to have that checks and balances in place. They just, they're even their systems, if it's not put in their system correctly, then there's going to be an error, right? So even with a system, you can have human error along the way.
Yeah.
But those are still not bookkeeping, right? Their systems are managing what they do, but you've got to put it in your books.
Awesome.